The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 2554 in the name of Kezia Dugdale on tackling mesothelioma in Scotland. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, so would those members who wish to speak please press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. And I call on Kezia Dugdale to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please, Ms Dugdale.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm very grateful to all the members who have decided to stay in the chamber to listen or to participate in this debate on how we tackle mesothelioma in Scotland. Mesothelioma is, of course, a cancerous disease, heavily linked to asbestos exposure, and a disease that in its final stages leaves sufferers in a great deal of pain and a feeling that they are suffocating to death. Now, my colleagues on the Labour benches will speak on behalf of many of the groups and campaigners who have campaigned on this for a long time. But I would like to begin this debate by highlighting the efforts of one woman, Julie Roberts, who I'm delighted to say has joined us in the gallery this evening with her friends and family, including her mother, Wilma. I first became aware of Julie's story through our mutual support of Hibernian Football Club, and it was there that Julie told me of the terrible experience her family had suffered at the hands of this deadly disease. Julie's father, Gordon, was a die-hard Hibby, a season ticket holder in the Upper West Stand at the famous Easter Road. He was a joiner by trade and had worked for one of Edinburgh's biggest house-building firms. It was during this time that tiny, deadly fibres of asbestos were innocently inhaled, embedding themselves in the lining of his lungs and slowly poisoning his body. It was only after retirement that a shortness of breath became pronounced, a tiredness that had little to do with physical activity laid him flat. A secret visit to his GP, a gamut of tests done without his family's knowledge, brought the answer. Stage 3 mesothelioma, a cancer of the lungs. His devastated wife mentioned it to her brother Jim. He'd been a plumber in the city's building trade for years. Suddenly, the pain in his back, which he'd written off as a golf swing problem, became more urgent. The tests were done. They, like Gordon's, were positive. In February last year, 68-year-old Jim died. And then on Easter Sunday, his brother, 69-year-old Gordon, Julie's dad, a granddad and a lifelong Hibs fan, passed away at St Columba's Hospital. Both killed by this devastating disease. To Julie's great credit, she wanted to ensure that others didn't suffer as her father and uncle did, so she fought back with her campaigning efforts. So can I thank her for sharing her story, and also thank the Edinburgh Evening News and the Sunday Mail for highlighting her story. Scotland currently has the highest global incidence of mesothelioma, with 175 cases diagnosed in 2014. Because of our proud shipbuilding history amongst many other of our industries, workers like Gordon were sadly left with no idea that the materials they were working with each day would plague their bodies in years to come. Thankfully, we saw the use of different types of asbestos being banned in the UK throughout the 1980s, with white asbestos finally being banned in 1999. But that came too late for too many people. A recent study showed that risks are particularly high for metal plate workers, mainly in, again, shipbuilding and carpentry. And the risk is higher for people exposed to asbestos before the age of 30. This study estimated that a shocking 1 out of 17 British men born in the 1940s and employed in carpentry for more than 10 years before the age of 30 would go on to develop this deadly disease. People who worked as plumbers or mechanics also have an increased risk. But it wasn't just the men. There have been many tragic cases of wives and partners dying by breathing in the asbestos fibres after washing their husbands' clothes week after week. Teachers and pupils and so many other people work in these public buildings, no doubt now filled with asbestos. We need a plan to remove it from these buildings, and the European Parliament have endorsed a 2028 deadline, but we cannot wait. We should be the country that leads the way, especially with our record. So moved by Julie's story, I wanted to find out more information about what we are doing in Scotland to tackle this issue. So the first place I looked for information was the Scottish Government's cancer strategy, published earlier this year. And sadly, I found that the word mesothelioma wasn't mentioned. Not once. So I turned to what services NHS Scotland offers to patients. And it shocked me to hear that NHS Scotland currently provides no dedicated mesothelioma-specific services. That just isn't good enough. A country like ours, with a government who so often talks about how much it's spending on our National Health Service, to not offer any specific services to people and families suffering at the fate of this awful disease. On top of that, I learned that mesothelioma is excluded from cancer waiting times targets. We must do more, and we must do it fast. So what can we do? Last month, I was delighted to welcome a number of campaign groups and organisations to the Scottish Parliament to discuss the issue of what we can do to tackle mesothelioma. I was delighted that a range of people joined us on that day, including Liz Darlison, the Director of Services, and a nurse for Meso UK, the UK's leading charity. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to her for leading on this issue for a number of years. Liz was unable to join us today, much as she wanted to, as she is busy holding her clinic right now, working with patients and their families. I'd also like to thank the STUC for their support and Scottish Hazards, who have been campaigning on workplace issues like this for a long time. And it's great to see so many of those faces from that day in the gallery this evening. We can work alongside the UK's leading charity, Meso UK, as they conduct their next patient experience survey next year. This would allow them to analyse where they can target their resources to have the greatest impact on patients and their families. Mesothelioma is the most symptomatic of all cancers, in that patients often experience breathlessness, pain, coughs, reduced appetite, malaise, and this is coupled with short life expectancy, heightens the need to get it right. And the pain can often be very challenging. There is a procedure currently only available in Liverpool and Portsmouth that can effectively manage pain, cordotomy. The team in Glasgow have the ability and the will to perform this and provide a service for Scotland. Meso UK has provided funding for equipment so that they can get it up and running, but this could do with long-term funding so that support for palliative care and pain management services should be built in. Surgical treatment for mesothelioma is currently subject of a national trial called MARS-2. There are no surgical centres in Scotland currently involved in this project. Now, I understand that there is differing medical opinion in terms of surgical treatment, but this has to be looked at in depth nationally at the moment. Surely we want Scotland to be at the heart of this work. And finally, we could fund meso nurses in Scotland through the NHS. Currently, Scotland has one dedicated meso nurse, and I'm delighted that Jan Devlin is in the gallery to join us today. But she's currently funded by Meso UK and Macmillan. From April next year, Meso UK will be funding this fully themselves. These are just a few ideas, presiding officers, and you will hear more from the Labour benches during this debate. So I'm asking the Scottish Government to listen, to take these ideas and these issues on board, to work with parties across this chamber and the campaigners in the gallery, so we can make a difference by using the powers of this Parliament to tackle this disease. Because as I said earlier, sadly, this disease is only to become much more prevalent in the coming years. Thank you.
Now move to the open speeches, and I call Stuart McMillan to be followed by Donald Cameron. 4 minutes, please, Mr McMillan.
Okay, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First of all, I'd like to refer members to my register of interests. And second, I'd like to congratulate Kezia Dugdale on securing this members' debate. Presiding Officer, certainly this Parliament has got a strong history in actually dealing with asbestos conditions, and there's been various pieces of legislation that have passed through this Parliament. Certainly the most recent of that was the Pleuroplex legislation in 2009. But certainly Scotland holds a significant place in the history of asbestos, having developed its industry early in the 1800s, and by 1914 there were more than 60 asbestos manufacturers throughout Scotland. And Scotland's industrial heartland was Clydeside. There, the famous shipyards saw significant growth from the success in the shipbuilding and engineering industries, and was responsible for 25% of the world's ships. And it was here that the asbestos panels enjoyed huge demand and were soon to be in every ship that sailed from the Clydeside ports. The building contractors and housing corporations were also major users of the product, which was famed for providing heat insulation at a low cost, and was quickly used to insulate boilers, pipes and storage heaters. And the product was also rolled out as a cheap alternative for building homes and schools, using asbestos insulated boards for walls and ceilings. And recent mortality stats show that in the UK alone, around 100 people die per week from asbestos cancers and diseases. And the mortality rate from asbestos diseases in the west of Scotland is one of the highest in the UK. And however, we would be wrong to presume that the asbestos legacy is a historical issue. Certainly, we know that there is a lot more to come in terms of asbestos issues. Exposure to the product continues across Scotland, and anyone working on a building constructed pre-2000 may be at risk of inhaling asbestos fibres. And it should be noted that we are seeing a growing number of people who have suffered exposure to asbestos, they believe occurred in public buildings such as schools, universities, and also hospitals, and as well as folk from the shipbuilding industry and the construction industry. There are deaths of teachers, lecturers, and care workers being added to those, as I just mentioned, as well as plumbers and electricians and also others. Now, Clydeside Action on Asbestos is a charity which was formed in 1985 to provide advice and assistance to those suffering from an asbestos-related condition. And Clydeside Action on Asbestos provides specialist advice on claiming industrial injuries benefits and state compensation, and it has successfully campaigned to implement changes in Scottish law, some of which has come through this Parliament. And this gives victims of asbestos-related conditions and their families more rights than elsewhere in these islands. And it's because of the awareness that has been raised by Clydeside Action on Asbestos that this charity receives approximately 800 new cases of people diagnosed with an asbestos condition from Scotland each year. Now, I meet regularly with Phyllis Craig MBE from Clydeside Action on Asbestos, and certainly this September we met with the First Minister to discuss important developments in the diagnosis and treatment of asbestos-related diseases in Scotland. And certainly also in Kezia Dugdale's motion, there's a number of points that she raised, and also certainly with our contribution. And I think if at any time this Parliament decides that it doesn't view asbestos conditions and mesothelioma as something serious, then certainly this Parliament would fail. But certainly historically, this Parliament hasn't failed, and this Parliament actually has led the way in the UK. And so one of the things that certainly Clydeside Action has undertaken, they produced a document earlier on this year. This went out to all GPs across Scotland, and this new tool has actually gained, it's become a specialist learning resource and reference tool on how to deal with the scourge of asbestos. I mean, I actually had an event in Parliament on this particular publication this year, and it's important for victims that family GPs are able to identify early symptoms of an asbestos illness, including mesothelioma, and in order that a referral to that specialist can actually be made. I'm conscious also you're indicating to me, but this resource has that early detection section, which will allow doctors a better understanding of the emotional, legal and financial strains that victims and their families encounter. But Presiding Officer, I'm conscious of your time. I do think that debates like this can be very helpful, but I do also think that the motion, unfortunately, doesn't highlight that where Scotland actually has been successful and where there also is a lot of good work undertaken in Scotland, not only by Clydeside Action Asbestos, but by the Tayside Group and also by Clydebank Asbestos Group. Thank you very much.
I call Donald Cameron to be followed by Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by also thanking Kezia Dugdale for bringing this motion forward for debate. And I'd like to commend her for being both consistent and persistent in bringing forward health issues on certain conditions that are often overlooked. I use that term overlooked because whilst this condition only affects around 1% of cancer sufferers in Scotland, it is overlooked. It is a condition which resulted from the poor working conditions of the heavy industrial period between the 1940s and 1970s, as Stuart McMillan noted. It affects people from a range of sectors. It isn't a genetic cancer. It isn't a cancer that developed as a result of radiation treatment or from the effects of lifestyle choices. Mesothelioma is a needless cancer that resulted from asbestos and affects hundreds of Scots today. I remember that I first came across the condition about 12 years ago during one of my first jobs as a lawyer here in Edinburgh, doing a temporary stint in a litigation department. And there was a dedicated team within that firm which dealt specifically with asbestos claims and worked with sufferers of mesothelioma. It was a unique and desperately sad scenario and highlighted to me the significance of the condition and its acute prevalence here in Scotland. So it is with regret that in the government's own Beating Cancer strategy, mesothelioma isn't mentioned. Not long after I was elected and asked to take on the health portfolio for my party, several people got in touch with me about mesothelioma. By and large, it was the family members of someone who suffers from the condition or died recently as a result of it. And there was a common theme in every email that this condition receives little to no publicity and that there was no mention of it in the cancer strategy. And it's why a debate like this tonight is so important. And when I have submitted, certainly.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank Mr Cameron for taking the intervention. Certainly, historically, in this chamber, the Conservative Party MSPs have voted against legislation that's been introduced to actually help people with asbestos conditions. Is Mr Cameron now saying that that position is now gone and that the Conservatives will look more favourably upon asbestos proposed legislation to come into this chamber?
Donald Cameron.
I can't speak for the party's position on what certain legislation, or what our position would be on certain legislation coming up. There is, as far as I'm aware, no prospect of such legislation. The point I'm making is that when I've submitted parliamentary questions on this issue, asking what action was being taken to raise awareness of and tackle mesothelioma specifically, the responses have been largely generic and have concentrated on a general strategy to tackle cancer as a whole. Now, I welcome the fact that there is a strategy in place, of course, to deal with cancer. It is a destructive disease, as we all know, in all of its varying forms, and we must do everything possible to fight cancer from all angles. However, given the stark statistic that 1.2% of cancer deaths result from mesothelioma, and in the light of the passion and vigour that mesothelioma campaigners, some of whom are here tonight, these campaigners have for eradicating this condition, there must be greater focus on the condition itself within the operation of the cancer strategy. I do want the Scottish Government to realise that mesothelioma sufferers want specific guarantees about what it will do, what the government will do to tackle and prevent this condition. After all, Mesothelioma UK noted in their 5-year strategy document that the UK as a whole has the highest incidence of mesothelioma in the world, and this is growing. And although this is a UK-wide report, I would encourage the Minister and her team to read it and take on board some of those ideas here in Scotland. Deputy Presiding Officer, I hope that some of my comments and those of others around this chamber will impress upon the government. We need a real commitment to tackling mesothelioma specifically, so that this acts not only as a genuine comfort to the families of mesothelioma sufferers, but it will also deliver some justice to those who continue to suffer the effects of it, and to those who have lost their lives because of it. Thank you.
Anna Sarwar, to be followed by Ben McPherson.
I would like to start by thanking Kezia Dugdale for bringing forward this important debate today, but also want to pay particular tribute to the strength and courage of Julie Roberts and other families who have lost loved ones to this terrible illness and are campaigning so that other families can be spared their pain. Scotland is the highest global occurrence of mesothelioma, with a particularly high incidence in the west of Scotland, a terrible legacy of previous use of asbestos in shipbuilding and similar industries. At present, there is no cure, but there are effective means of controlling symptoms and making early diagnosis. And while there are also increasing numbers of clinical trials and of new treatments, patients can only access these if they are promptly diagnosed and properly informed. Currently, however, there are 4 key areas in which Scotland is not currently addressing the issue in a way that recognises the scale of the problem. NHS Scotland currently provides no mesothelioma-specific services. Mesothelioma is excluded from cancer waiting time standards. Patients' outcomes and service provisions are not audited, and the Scottish Government currently commit no central funding to mesothelioma research. I know the Scottish Government are always keen to compare the NHS in England to Scotland. In England, mesothelioma is subject to waiting time targets. Patient outcomes are audited, and the UK Government has identified it as a priority area for the Department of Health. And the UK Government has contributed £5 million of central funding to research. The situation in Scotland is unacceptable. That is why I believe the opportunity for a new model of care in Scotland is possible. Because of a glaring clinical need, and despite receiving no formal funding, a model has grown organically in the west of Scotland. Established and led by an expert group, Dr Blythe leading that group, utilising expertise in oncology, pathology, radiography, cardiothoracic surgery and palliative care support. This multidisciplinary team convenes on a monthly basis at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, but I want to stress functions on the basis of goodwill and the commitment of the team, rather than through formal job planning or funding from the NHS. I think we should pay tribute to all members of that multidisciplinary team. Its funding comes from external sources, including Macmillan and Mesothelioma UK. I want to say to the Minister that despite the clinical work undertaken by the team and the externally funded research, this is a fragile and unsustainable model. Mesothelioma patients in the west of Scotland are fortunate to have this service because significant service inequality exists elsewhere in Scotland with no other dedicated service available. Out with Glasgow, patients are looked after by committed and caring teams, and we should thank them. But teams are designated to look after lung cancer patients with services designated for that purpose. As a result, patients often feel marginalised or report that their care needs are not properly addressed. The exclusion of mesothelioma from the cancer waiting time target amplifies this problem, since health boards have no motivation to develop specific services. I recognise, I'm just in my last 40 seconds, so I won't take the intervention. I recognise this specific point might well be covered within the wider review of patient standards, but I would welcome the Minister's comments on this point. I believe, therefore, that there is a need for a new model of care in Scotland, in addition to inclusion within patient standards and central funding to support a world-leading service and a research model. A hub and a bespoke model based in Glasgow is supported by many campaigners and clinicians on the issue. It is a model that could provide high-quality and equitable care for patients. It is a model that could work for right across the whole of Scotland. It's a model that could transform care in Scotland. So, Deputy Presiding Officer, I believe Scotland has world leaders in mesothelioma research. Scotland has world-leading clinicians, and I hope the Minister will listen to those campaigning for a dedicated service and confirm this evening that the Scottish Government is willing not just to listen, but to act for these families.
Ben McPherson, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd also firstly like to thank Kezia Dugdale for bringing this important debate to the Chamber, but most of all to recognise that what inspired Kezia Dugdale is the story of Julie Roberts, who's also my constituent, and I also welcome her and her mother Wilma and Lindsay here in the Chamber this evening. And I think what's so inspiring about the story from Julie Roberts' story is that it's a real example that one voice can help change a country. It's because of Julie's story and her courage speaking out about her family circumstances and the difficulties within that, and her